So a ball in a cage is a mathematical gee whiz. So the first thing you want to do is make sure that the grain of the wood is running the length of your rails. You want it to go this way. If you go across this way, they're more likely to snap. And that's the biggest problem with the ball in the cage, besides getting it round, is snapping the rails as you're carving. So I generally decide how wide I want the rail, and I'll use a square and mark it off, and I mark the center line. And in some ball in the cages, they actually carve the top as well, all the way through. I do not on mine, but it's just because I'm lazy. And it leaves it more susceptible to breaking up here because you're working with the end grain. So I mark out my rails, and I mark them all the way around. So you want to do it on all sides. Get your rails, and then the bottom piece, you mark that off, and I make it about the same width as the rails. So when you get done, you'll have all your rails marked, and then you're going to go to the top of your block, and continue the rails up and over so that you make a square here in the middle. And from that corner to that corner is the maximum width of your ball. And so you can measure from there to there and set up a compass and make your circle. And that's going to give you the diameter of your ball. And you're going to translate that onto the side here. So having done that, I'm not sure why it's not on the top, but having done that here, I know my ball inside the cage will be no bigger than here and here on this rail. And I will draw this all the way around on all sides. And what this does is it kind of tells me how far down this section here can be carved down in. And it'd be this distance right here. You can carve that in. I'm sorry, it's this distance right here. Mm-hmm. This, I can lower that ball, this surface down that far. Mm-hmm. So I get it all laid out, and the layout is critical. Once you get it drawn out, it becomes a little bit easier to figure where you're going to go. Let's see where my starting side is. Okay. So ignore the top half up here. So this was laid out here, and I cheat. I drill a hole all the way through.
Oh, man.
On all sides. And the reason being is it just gives me a better starting point. Some people don't, they carve it all the way through, but I end up literally just drilling a hole all the way through, and I allow plenty of room so that if my drill bit doesn't come out perfectly square on the other side, I'm still within the rails. And you don't want to hit where the ball is going to be. So that's the first step, is that one. And then the next step is I use a chisel. And basically I carved it with these 4 tools: a chisel, a knife, a gouge, and I'll go along, and stop cuts are critical in this particular thing. And I just go along like this, and I make a stop cut all the way down. So I go into the corner and I just make a stop cut. And I'll go all the way around on all sides making this stop cut. And same across the bottom. And as you know, you're going across grain here, so it gets to be a little harder. And you don't have to do it right on the line. You could come inside the line to allow for a little error if you want, which often isn't a bad idea. especially when you're right here at the ball. And make sure you get the two to join in the corners. And that's why I do this where I have a table I can push down, because as you go across grain, it's a little harder. So you're going to go all the way around. And once you get that, work towards your hole or the center line. So I go in that stop line I cut, and I just carve inward. And as you see, that one split down here just a little bit. You can see it went right down to my stop line. And that's why it's critical that you get those stop lines in there. Otherwise, it's going to run all the way off the end. So I'm going to go back, and I keep working the stop cuts. I never quit. Let's see if this is going to help any. Tell me if this makes it worse or better.
Well, that's better.
So once I get it, I keep going back, and then I can use the chisel. Now that one was the gouge because it cuts a little bigger, and I find a gouge cuts easier. But when I get to the corner, I want to make sure that I keep that corner, and I work the stop cuts, and then you clear it out. And by doing it on a table like this, I can keep my chisel straight up and down. If you'll notice it, I try to keep it straight in at it so that it makes a good square cut. And the hole really does, it's nice because I can direct the cuts towards that hole. And if you're really talented, you could actually drill this whole thing out. And if you had a mortising chisel, you could actually just put that on your drill press and cut this straight through, and you wouldn't have any carving at all.
That's cheating.
So as you can see, it goes down fairly fast. You start carving in. And this is just a same thing. It'll show partial through. This one's farther through. You can, it starts to slope in a little bit like this as you're going. And so, again, you take your straight up and down chisel and just work it, trying to flatten all that out and keeping it as straight as can be and as close to your edge. You're getting a lot of my arm and not much of the carving. So then when you get close, you want to try to keep this side straight and parallel with this side. And you're going to cut it all the way out to where you have something like this.
The scroll saw cuts that out a lot faster too.
Yes, it does. You know, the shop got a scroll saw here, and I have yet to not break the blade every time I use it.
Yeah, it's getting pretty thick for a scroll saw.
Yeah. So you're going to cut straight down all the way through on this thing as much as you possibly can, keeping it straight up and down and fairly close to your rail in size. And so what you'll end up with is one that looks like this on all four sides. I took a V-tool at this point and keeping the V-tool one side straight up and down, I just scored along where the ball is going to be. Now remember that ball that ball literally is going to extend into this area,
Right.
the roundness of this ball. And I would redraw my ball. It's right here. The edge of that ball is right here. So you keep redrawing in when you carve it off. So I just score it here. I know I can go down that certain depth, and that depth really is, I can go down because the ball is only going to be this far inside the rail, this little piece right here. That you got to leave, but I can carve this much down above the top of that ball. So this area here, I could literally carve down so it's this width. I could carve this much of it off, which would find the top of the ball, which would be here. So you just carve this section down from here. And if you'll notice, I draw my lines over onto the rail, and the reason being, I want to have a reference I can come back to each and every time. And if you have a center line from your thing, you can actually find the center here if you have to retrace your circle. That's where one of the templates I didn't make, but I would cut that circle out so I could just lay it on here every time. You know, I'd use my compass and cut it out of a piece of plastic or a piece of paper so that I could just lay it on here and go around the edge. So you're just going to carve this, and it can be flat at this point, down that far. And you can measure it if you want, or you can eyeball it. I would suggest measuring when you get close. And I'm using the round gouge. And again, you want to make sure that you stop cut it, but lightly here, because you don't want to go too deep and trespass into what's going to be the ball. So I kind of tip it and go in at an angle. When you get done with that part, you're going to end up with down about as far as you're going to want it. This one's not quite there, but close. I'm going to start rounding here and here so that I get a rounded section. So I can round this all the way around. It's funny, me watching it and seeing it, what you guys are looking at, it's a little different. So you want to round this over, coming this way and into the ball, into the inside of the cage. So you're just going to start chiseling this down and rounding it over. So one of the things I didn't show you is from your circle that you make, you want to cut these templates. And they're going to be different. The diameter here's the same, the circle's the same, but how much curve it has, how much of the circle you have on the plastic is varies. So this one's slightly less curve, it's cut off about here. And you're going to use these because this is your ball. And you're literally going to put that right here. Let me see if I can get it onto a color that'll show up. You're going to put it on the ball, and you're going to be looking where it fits and doesn't fit. And you're going to use that to get your roundness. So as you can see, I drew on this one the circle, and that's where I'm heading for. And I want to round. I want to take this part down farther, right here and here. And with this gauge, and you start out with one of the shallower ones to start with, and you put your gauge on here, and you judge whether or not that's the right amount of roundness. And I can see a lot of daylight here. But as I come up into here, there's very little daylight on that curved part. Let me see if I can rotate this over.
Yeah, that's it.
So right here at the top, right where I'm fitting it here, I don't see any daylight. So that tells me that's about right. In this area, I've got about the right curvature. So you're going to do that all the way around this thing. And when you come to get that all rounded off, and if this height is the right, if you cut this part down the right amount, you can round to that center line. And that's why I keep that center line there, is because that little dot right there is the highest part on this ball. On all four sides, that's the highest pot. So you kind of want to avoid that, and that's why I keep redrawing this back in. So when I measure, I know that will be high. And as you can see here, how much daylight there is, it doesn't form the curve at all. And if you get the center somewhat curved and about the right, then you're going to worry about the edges. But by getting this, you're actually just putting a barrel right now inside the ball. And watch your edges so that you don't go too far into the rail. That's why I tend to leave it just a tad wide. I've got maybe less than a 1/16 of an inch from where I want it to be to here. And that way, if my knife slips a little bit or hits it, I can shave it off and clean it up. So you're just going to round this thing over. And then when you get to, I got to get the good shot of this one. When you get to where you're going to carve here to break this ball free, you'll have rounded this entirely into a nice, kind of like a barrel or a hat box or whatever you want to call it. And same thing, as much there as possible on the edges. You're going to come in at an angle. You don't go straight down. Once you get close, you're going to come in at a slight angle, but starting here and ending there. So you come in at an angle like that. So I will go in like this. And again, this is the high point, so I can cut that down. And the first one I did, I actually didn't round this over. I went through and broke this thing free. And if it's totally free, it's actually a little harder to round over because then it's flopping around. So if you take the time to just barely leave it attached, coming in at an angle from the center height, and you can kind of judge as I'm looking, I can see that back edge and that edge. I can kind of tell where my center, where the rail should come through. I'm going to come to this side. And again, remember, this would have been rounded a little bit more this way. And it actually splits because the grain is going this way. It splits out pretty easily. But I want to make sure when I'm going like this, I don't go past that center point. And because it's still attached here, it makes it easier to work on the end parts. It's not going to flop around on me. But because it's still attached, you can't measure this way nearly as well. You can't measure across because your rails are in the way. You can measure this way fine, but you can't measure across where the rails are unless you cut this down really small. And you can do that. You can cut just a little tiny fraction of this that would fit between the two rails to measure. You'll often come out with it slightly oval. Some of them, they're more egg-shaped than they are round. But that's where the guide will come in, and once you get used to using that, it allows you to get a fairly round ball. The one Brian did, that would have worked beautifully, that ball inside the round cage. The guides would work real well with one like that. Now the twisted one that Brian had, you just draw out the rails so they come like this from corner to corner. I've seen one that's just a single twist like this, that the rails come that direction. You can put them in spoons. I've seen them incorporated balls and cages in the ends of spoons as part of their handles. If you search online, there's quite a few ones you can find of different designs. Now, as I get closer right here in the middle to where it'll break through, I want to make sure that I'm just as close as I want to be to having that rail thickness here at the proper edge, so that I don't disrupt the amount of wood I have for the ball. If I keep cutting this way and this rail, I've left too much extra wood, then the ball may end up coming out of the cage. And really what holds your ball in the cage is just this little amount from here to here. If you look at the circle, here's the rail, and the rail's not going to be any thicker than that. And it's this little amount of wood. But if that's too tight, your ball won't roll freely. So in reality, your ball is just a hair sanding width or two smaller than that diagonal. But you shoot for the diagonal. That way, you know, you'll have enough ball, enough wood to make the ball you want, and it won't fall out. Now, there are people that actually carve the cage, carve the ball separately, and then they soak the ball in water, or the cage in water,
That's cheating.
and get it good and thoroughly soaked. And then they just snap the ball in.
That's cheating.
Yes, it is. But that's how they put a steel ball inside of these. Jeff Eiler at some of the shows has had a steel ball in a cage.
Oh, okay.
And that's how they do it. They carve the cage based upon the size of the ball. And so just knowing the diameter of the ball. You can make your cage to fit that using the same principle. You know your ball's this wide, so you lay that out from the center line, both directions, put your compass down, and then you can figure your rails. So I'm getting close to where, from what I see, this part right here, where the ball is, that right there is almost in line with this piece right here. So it tells me I'm getting close to where if I work this side and this side, it'll pop free. And if you've carved it round this way, there won't be very much holding it right here in the middle. I don't have it carved nearly round enough yet to be able to say that's going to be true. But I found with the layout, it only takes, once you get the layout done and these parts cut, the actual getting the ball is not that difficult and time consuming, provided you've got your gauges made and you can just start the rounding process. And as I said, the goal is you mark your high points, even inside the cage here, on the inside part of this. I would mark a high point right in here so that I know which direction to go. You always go downhill from your high point. And using the gauge, I can actually tell that I'm still wide from here to here on the ball. From this part to this part, I should be able to get that over the top of that, and it doesn't. So that tells me I'm still way too high. And I know that from just looking at this. If I actually had a straight edge, let me grab one here. If I go straight across here, that should be the high part of the ball. And you can see right here, that shadow, that tells me that ball is that much too high. So if I draw a line in here from this line to that line, all of this is extra. So I can cut that straight down. Because if you look at, it's amazing how much darker things need to be. So if you look at, that's the high part of the ball. When I measured it out and draw the circle, that should be the very top of the ball. And as you can see, I still have wood right here. So that can come straight off. And it'll be true here too. There's more on this edge I could cut down. And then it's just a case of thinking, did I lose you? Oh,
Yes.
hang on.
There you
Okay. Somebody was calling me. You think of it as here's your ball on all sides, and from this high point to all corners like this, these all need to come down and at an angle towards the opposite side. This being your high point. To get a round ball, you literally have to look at every radial needs to go sloping inward. So whether you do it like I was going this direction or across this way, either way, you gotta curve it off. And I use the chisel an awful lot just as I get towards this edge here, because I want to make sure that I keep as straight a line up and down this part as I can, and that I have a good stop cut so that when I come in at it, I don't dink the rail. The first one I did, I sure had a lot of score marks on this rail because the knife would come like this and I would hit it. So I learned to leave just a little bit for cleanup, but not enough that when I took it off, my ball would fall out. So I keep looking at that as I get closer and closer to where it's going to come through. Because at that point, it's a case of thinning the rail and rounding the ball for it to pop through. And if you're got a good eye, you can literally round this barrel part without using the gauges a whole lot, which is what I do. And then I go back to the gauges. I've been bit once or twice doing that, but now I told you I was a little high here, so that's why I'm just whacking down that barrel part. Lighter color. See the gray under there? Let's see which way I can turn this. There's a little bit of a gray color. So I'm still too wide this way because this won't fit down over it, but not by much. On this end. And if you're a power carver, you can cheat at this fairly well. That's starting to fit over the ball now, over the edges just a little bit. I've got maybe a 1/16 on this end to go. And once you get it round, or as round as you can, and it's broken free, you can spin the ball and make sure it's round in all areas. So you'll end up with something on the order of this. This one, if you'll notice, it catches. So it's not quite round. I know where the high spots are on this one. If I get it in the right position, it works well. But the ball isn't quite round, and the rails, let's see if I can find one. If you look, my rails have a little bit of unevenness, not right here. This one is just a skosh fatter right here. So once you get it broken free and somewhat round, it's a case of making sure the ball is round and there's no high spots on it. Hangs up right there. So then you have to decide whether it's the ball or the rail. And if I can turn the ball and make it go, I'd look for the high spot on the ball.
How do you carve it once it's loose and round like that? I mean, how do you?
You have to hold it. Some people jam something in, like another piece of wood right here.
Yeah, okay.
I just ended up holding mine straight down to the end like that,
Mm-hmm.
and then carve a little bit on this side. Let's see where it's high. I can, and it's going to be hard to demo it, but by spinning the ball in one fixed spot and looking right down through here. So let's see if I can get a good picture of that.
Oh, that's where you can see it's high. Okay.
Yeah, so right now I can't even turn the ball. So there's something hung up. So I'll go backwards and see if I can figure out exactly where on the ball it's too high. And you can look down in here. You can actually look down in. I can see daylight right here.
Mm-hmm.
On that one. I've got a little bit of daylight. I don't have any daylight right here. See, it's hung on the rail.
Yeah.
I have daylight down here. So by going around, you can kind of figure out that the ball needs a little more rounding. I've got a flat spot right there. So it just takes time and practice.
Yeah.
And I try not to mess with the rails too much once I get the rails carved. But because I allow extra on these, I can go in. My pencil mark is right here. So I've got that little tiny bit of extra right there that I can take out and will take out before I totally am happy with the round part of the ball.
Here's a marvelous little tool. An emery board.
Yes.
You women have much, much more advantage to us.
Yes.
It's stiff and you can just go like this.
So you can possibly leave two sides attached if you want it, but as round as you can get it before you pop that last part loose, it does make it easier. And I'm mainly carving from the top, but you can come in when you're working the edge of that ball on the inside. You can come from the different angles. And because you're going to work this way towards the center here, because this is the high spot on this side. So you're going to work this way down. I got to work this way in. This ball has to come down in general so that it follows this curved line of the ball. So if I mark this here, I'm bringing this circle part of the ball down, kind of eyeballing where that edge ought to be. And I'll be careful then when I get to this part, having looked at where I project that ball is going to be, I want to watch right here that I don't go too far that way and take too much wood on that corner until the very end. Those 8 or 4 high spots on this case, 1, 2, 3, 4, those 4 high spots right there on those corners. So it's total of 8. That's where you're going to break it loose just at the very last minute. And you're all aiming, everything you're doing now from carving is aiming towards those center spots. And because the grain is running this way, you'll notice it gets a little bit of tear out, especially as hard as I'm pushing right now. So as you get closer, you're going to take shallower shavings so that you don't get those tear outs, because the tear outs will force you to change your design a little bit or your size of your ball. And if you can work from the top downhill, you'll get less of those chipping or tear out effects. So you turn your ball around and work at it this way. Because by going this way at it, I'm going uphill and there's more wood to dig into. So knowing where the center line is here, and I keep it marked. I work down and away from that towards the next center line. And when I get about down here towards this one, because it's inside the cage, it's harder to get to, but you can. It just takes a little time. And as I said, some people will cut this square out as well. And you can actually then see through down into your ball and you can work on it a little bit from the top. I just never have, because these rails are much more fragile than the rails going with the grain of the wood. These are very short grain, and if you push against that and it's a rail, it's cut through here, you will most likely break these. So that's why I leave mine whole. It's less susceptible to breaking. Got any questions?
That's pretty cool. Now I know. I never knew how they did it.
Yeah, everybody thinks it's real complicated, but the carving out to this stage where you have the holes here is pretty straightforward, as long as you've marked out where the ball is going to be. And I left this one a little bit big. Before I had started rounding, I probably would have cut this section more straight down, so I didn't have so much to worry about rounding over. Because if you look at, literally, you're just taking the corner off till this becomes round here from inside, but you're just rounding over. You're literally going to be cutting this part to where you're just taking this off.
Right.
And same thing here, you're taking this off. So if you can round that into, like I told you, a barrel that's the size of your circle, that makes it so then this barrel, and this is a flat edge, then you're going to do the same thing on this one. You're just going to round it over, and then that's just going to leave these 4 little high spots and right next to the rail.
So Brian mentioned using an emery board to help sand down and stuff. Is there any other tips for sanding this?
Get a piece of sandpaper that's thin, a strip. Don't get a 4x something sheet. Cut your sheet down into a thinner piece, and you can lay it around your ball like this, and go back and forth, you know, kind of like my finger is doing right now.
Yeah.
You know, you'd pull the ends all the way out here so you have this circle-like effect,
Mhm.
and it'll get all the sides.
Gotcha.
The nice thing about the emery cloth is, or a board, is it's stiff.
Yeah.
And so if there's just one little spot you want to get, it gets in real. I use that emery. I've got a pile of them because I use them on all sorts of stuff. It's got a rough side and a smooth side. And like most sandpaper, those don't last forever. I use them on my wood burning tips. I use them on all sorts of stuff to clean them up. But they are particularly nice, and you can cut those down to even a narrower thing. You can cut a point. And you're going to ruin your scissors, by the way, when you do this. You're not going to come up with a good edge on your scissors. But I have a dedicated craft scissor. And so you can shape those emery boards to different shapes. And if you need a little more stiffness, you could glue them onto a board, or you could glue a couple of them together if you needed something that was a little stiffer. You can do the same thing with sandpaper. If you get some lollipop sticks, glue sandpaper onto them. Shape them to whatever shape. If you need a emery board that has a real sharp point like that, if you need something that's really sharp, then cut your board that shape, or your popsicle stick that shape, and put your sandpaper on it. It'll give you a really fine little tip right there to get into little ends, and you can go from there.
Wow, thanks. That was awesome.
Thank you. Yeah.
You're welcome. I use a lot of the, oh Lordy, what's the name of it? There's a sandpaper now that you don't have to, Mira something. It came from a body shop, is how it got started. You will find it in the wood carving magazines. Most of the wood carving stores carry it anymore. And it basically is, let's try to see if I had a piece of it in here. I've got it in the other bag. Hang on a minute, I'll go grab it.
Bob, are you in Hawaii right now?
No, East Hill of Kent right now.
Oh, when are you going?
We're leaving April 2nd.
Oh. Do you think you'll have to wear masks there?
Yeah. Not while we're in our house. I think masks will be required still at the stores, Costco or, Safeway, whatever.
This is called Abranet. Another name on it is MIRKA. It's started, like I say, in the body shops, for working on body shops, and it is a sandpaper or a sanding cloth. Comes in multiple grits.
Yes, I've got some of that. Yeah.
And it doesn't clog up. If it does, you just shake it out. It doesn't wear out hardly at all. I've got a few that I've had for a couple of years, and they're getting kind of not as good. But the nice thing about something like this, I can literally tear a strip or cut a strip. You can fold it. I turn it into coils sometime, and you can just literally, it makes a good sandpaper.
What is it made out of? Do you know?
It's like a fabric material, but it's very. This is a 400. No, this is the 240. But it
So,
you know what the screen looks like.
yeah.
It's very similar, but a lot tighter, a lot smaller holes. Looks very much like a window screen. And
Would
you can
that-
get it,
Sorry.
pardon?
Would that leave, like, when you use sandpaper, that leaves like grit on your wood, so you shouldn't use your knife again on it? Would that leave that?
This doesn't leave grit that I know of. I'm sure there's a little bit because it is a rough surface, but it doesn't leave the grit like sandpaper where the sand falls off.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
Uh,
Because I find in my projects, I always get down to like a good spot where I was like, I could start sanding, but then I'm like, if I start sanding, I can't go back, you know? So
you can, it just means you have to resharpen your tools if there's a lot of grit on your piece.
yeah.
And Burnett, you said you've used some, Brian?
Yes, I like it real well.
Yeah, and have you
And
had
you
it
get-
much
you can get
residue?
like 800, you can get 800, 1,000. I've got all sorts of grits, not
Yeah.
grit, that's not even appropriate, but
No, it isn't.
Yeah.
But it doesn't leave the grainy stuff on the material, on your wood.
Interesting.
You know, like sandpaper deposits some of the sand, the grit,
Yeah,
and I've not found that to be true with these.
yeah.
That's cool.
And they say you can get it cheaper at an auto body shop. I've not been to an auto body shop to find out. Bought a couple of packages years ago up at either Rockler or Woodcraft, and I haven't had to buy another one since.